It was just past midnight. The waters near Guadalcanal were still, the night moonless. The sea-black Japanese cruisers crept forward silently, confident, proud, deadly. They had dominated the Pacific, for months unmatched in night warfare. This time the Americans were watching. Not with their eyes but with radar. The Japanese had no idea. Their best ships were entering a trap. They couldn't see it. They didn't believe it. And by the time they realized the truth, their ships were already sinking. This was not a single battle. It was the start of a nightmare, one that would repeat, over and over, until the Imperial Navy once feared across the Pacific was bleeding, broken, and in disbelief. Before Guadalcanal, Japan's navy was an unstoppable force. Its ships were fast, heavily armed, and led by crews that had trained obsessively for years. Pearl Harbor was just the beginning. In a matter of months, the Japanese swept through the Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, one Allied defeat after another. Aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, Japanese forces ruled the waves. The Imperial Navy believed it was untouchable. They had better torpedoes, better night vision training, and battle-hardened officers. American ships, seen as clumsy, inexperienced, slow to react, to Japanese naval command, Guadalcanal was just another operation, another box to check. But this time, they were wrong. Guadalcanal was small, just a jungle-covered island in the Solomon chain. Most people hadn't even heard of it, but it had something crucial, a newly built airfield. If the Japanese finished it, they could threaten U.S. supply lines to Australia, control the air, control the sea. The Americans understood this. In August 1942, they launched a surprise landing. They seized the airfield and renamed it Henderson Field. From that moment, Guadalcanal was no longer just a dot on the map. It became the heart of a brutal, 6-month-long struggle. And the Japanese, unwilling to accept the loss, kept sending ships to take it back. Fast, silent, deadly. They called it the Tokyo Express. But the Americans would soon give it a different name, the Road to Hell. On the night of August 8, 1942, the Japanese launched a counterattack. They caught the Allied fleet off guard near Savo Island. The result was devastating. In less than an hour, the Japanese sank for heavy cruisers, without losing a single ship to Tokyo. It was a message. The old rules still applied. Japanese night superiority was reeled up to Washington. It was a wake-up call. But the Americans didn't retreat. They studied, adapted, and prepared for what would come next. They brought in radar. They trained in night combat. And they held Henderson Field despite everything. By October, the Americans were ready to fight back. On October 11th, the Japanese sent a force of cruisers to bombard Henderson Field again. But this time, the Americans were waiting at Cape Esperance. U.S. forces, led by Rear Admiral Norman Scott, intercepted the Japanese. It was chaos. Gunfire in the dark. Ships weaving through smoke and flame. But the Americans came out on top. One Japanese cruiser was sunk. Another heavily damaged. More importantly, the U.S. Navy had won its first major surface engagement of the war. The myth of Japanese invincibility was cracking. And back in Tokyo, for the first time, naval officers began asking, what if we're not unbeatable? Then came November, and with it, the most brutal series of naval engagements in the Pacific War. The naval battle of Guadalcanal lasted for days from November 13th to 15th, 1942. It began with a bold move. American Admiral Daniel Callahan led a force of cruisers and destroyers straight into the path of 2 Japanese battleships. His orders stopped them from bombarding Henderson Field at any cost. In the dark, ships collided at point-blank range. Torpedoes exploded. Guns fired at near-zero range. The U.S. lost 2 admirals that night. Several ships sank. But the Japanese battleships were turned back. The next night, The Japanese tried again. This time, the battleship Kirishima was sunk by the American South Dakota and Washington. The seafloor near Guadalcanal began to fill with wreckage. Even the Japanese began calling it the graveyard. The confidence in Tokyo began to unravel. How could the Americans, so green, so inexperienced, defeat their best ships? The answer came from three things the Japanese hadn't fully prepared for. 1. Radar. The Americans could see in the dark. They knew where the enemy was before a single shot was fired. 2. Henderson Field. That airstrip, constantly under attack, remained operational. Daylight brought wave after wave of American airstrikes on Japanese ships. 3. Attrition. Japan couldn't replace lost ships and train sailors fast enough. Every sunk cruiser, every downed pilot, every dead officer, it all mattered. The Japanese commanders began to realize they were losing something more important than ships. They were losing the war of momentum. By the end of the Guadalcanal campaign, Japan had lost 2 battleships, 1 aircraft carrier, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers, and nearly 3,000 sailors, more than the ships themselves. They lost initiative. They were now reacting to American moves, not dictating them. Their supply lines were shattered. Their elite pilots were dying. Their navy, once feared across the Pacific, was being cut to pieces. The Tokyo Express became a suicide mission, and Guadalcanal became a symbol of disbelief. After Guadalcanal, everything changed. Japan could no longer go on the offensive. Their fleet, though still large, was stretched thin, damaged, demoralized. The United States, on the other hand, was just getting started. New ships were coming off the line, new carriers, new tactics, and new confidence. Guadalcanal didn't just change the map, it changed the mindset. The Americans now believed they could win, and the Japanese, were beginning to doubt. In 6 months of brutal fighting, Japan had lost more than ships and sailors. It lost something deeper. The illusion of superiority. Guadalcanal was supposed to be a quick win. Instead, it was a long bleed. One night at a time. One battle at a time. The Imperial Navy was being cut down by radar, by air power, by the sheer will of an enemy that refused to give up. The Japanese were in disbelief, because they had never truly believed the Americans could fight like this. But at Guadalcanal, the Americans didn't just fight, they outfought them, and in the dark waters of the Solomon Islands, an empire began to drown.